Thank you to QAA Scotland for this kind invitation to speak at your Enhancement Themes Conference, and I look forward to joining delegates from my home here in Brisbane in the live Q&A session in Glasgow on the 4th of June. When I think about the conference theme in this age of abundant disruption, I'd like to reframe the take on using evidence to a need for sector literacy. And this keynote is a bit of a call for arms to use our sector literacy to lead a conceptualisation of a connected educational ecosystem across the lifelong learner lifespan, from high chair to higher education, as one of our higher education ministers in Australia was fond of saying. I think there's a real opportunity here for us in higher education to re-establish trust in our learning and teaching capability to align our education and training to what's needed now. And I think there's also the opportunity for us to do a bit of a reset of relationships, which seem to have gone a bit awry in the recent past. And as always, there's a bit of a motto for this: never waste a crisis. So to give you some framing for what I'm going to talk about, the premise is that we need a strategic concerted action to enable all citizens to engage in beneficial lifelong learning. And the challenge is, what if, in response to this massive disruption, Industry 4.0, globalisation, demographic change, and now COVID-19, it was our sector that took responsibility for brokering an inclusive vision for a connected lifelong learning ecosystem, using our full collective resources, so all actors. I think it would be good for us. It's obviously the right thing to do, and that's intrinsically motivating. I think it might help us with that assumption of agency around our sector's issues that are well known around health and well-being. And there's the further opportunity, I think, to reset our social contract, which seems to again have been slipping with some of this empathetic civic engagement here. But just a bit from me, so there we are. I'll just turn this upside down so you can see me a bit more clearly. Hi. What a year, really. So you would have seen us in Australia having those catastrophic bushfires. We didn't have mountain goats roaming streets as in Wales, but kangaroos jumped down vacant streets in Adelaide. And we've seen heartbreaking cues about accessing welfare payments. There's a lot going on in higher education, it would be fair to say, and always. Myriad of reports, so I've just collected together some of the most recent ones. Brexit and the future of the TEF probably seem like distant memories now, and there's been further inputs with COVID-19 slanted reports. But one thing that hasn't changed, I think, is the sharpness of the critique of higher education. This first article here about the slow, expensive bachelor's degrees, which are not fit for purpose when, as this article puts it, snacking on education should be the goal. And that critique is only sharpened in the context of COVID. So here's the Spectator saying graduates aren't in graduate jobs, there's debilitating skills shortages, there's a lack of action on lifelong learning, and we all really need to get our act together in education and training and better align ourselves with the economic and social needs of the country. And it comes from all sides. So here's even our graduates saying, according to this Pearson survey from late last year, that they don't think that higher education's prepared them for their careers. There's some big buts on this sort of data, and that's where you probably need to be quite familiar with your sector literacy context. Asked in Australia, when supervisors were asked in Australia whether they thought the qualification prepared graduates well, 92% of supervisors thought graduates were well or very well prepared. When they were asked about whether the qualification was important, a different question, there was lower satisfaction rates and very discipline dependent. But even so, 70% of health graduates still thought that the qualification was important. So it's good that Universities UK have got themselves organised around all this and are putting out all the right messages. Look at the messaging here around lifelong learning, skills, flexibility, credits, choice, a continuing focus on widening participation, and lobbying around that need for flexibility, particularly around access to credit, and credit being used wisely, the opportunity for more degree apprenticeships so that students are getting paid while they're studying, careers advice, and mental health. So if I could just get a couple of other evidence and data cards on the table at an early stage, despite the hype, formal qualifications will remain important. This Australian government prediction is that 90% of new jobs will require post-secondary qualifications. We understand that Industry 4.0 will disrupt the world of work, even though estimates vary, and this is just a nice piece that collects some of those various estimates for you. But we also know that just as knowledge has a limited shelf life, so too now do skills. They are unstable and they require updating, and the half-life of skills continues to shrink. Of course, digital and technical skills have always been important and continue to do so, but note this rise of this concept of a hybrid job, where you need the tech skills and some of those other skills such as writing, creativity, and collaboration. So the underpinning theme here is that we all will need to be engaged in more lifelong learning. This estimate in the Australian context, but I don't think it would be much different worldwide, up to 33% increase over our lifetime. And that's because jobs and job tasks are changing. Here the suggestion is job tasks are changing 18% per decade. And this lifelong learning won't necessarily be happening in unis or further education or vocational education environments. More of it will be on the job and in short, flexible courses. So I think we get to the stage where we saw Industry 4.0 coming down at us fast down a tunnel, but that's been turbocharged with the advent of COVID-19, which has just accelerated the future of work. And it's made everything big. How big, you ask? Well, here I am looking at front pages from the New York Times. And ironically, the New York Times has had to break its own front page design rules to accurately convey the enormity of job losses and the unemployment claims. So it's just accelerating the future of work. So they've used column 6, and you count them across, and that is column 6. Big lines, very, very effective presentation. We could probably all learn from that. And when I look in the Australian context, it's not much different. We've had a significant jump in unemployment, but again, just trying to show you the enormity of the change on a graph. Again, this is the percentage in the fall of hours worked. As against the months from the start of the recession, the 90s, 80s and 1990s recessions look positively gentle, falling over a 24-hour period. We've fallen now in such a straight line, just in 1 month. And all of the evidence is telling us that the recovery will be slow, the effects will be long-term, and worryingly also in our context that it's younger workers and women that will be hardest hit. And you've got some examples there. 40%, the Grattan Institute in Australia estimates, of 15 to 19-year-olds will be out of work. The point for us here is this is the labour market that our graduates will be entering and where our students will be seeking to find work to support their studies. So we've got some hard and dedicated work to do around working with employers, graduates and students to try and mitigate the effects of all this. So COVID-19 is saying to companies they need to start reskilling their workforces now. Here's another, and it's amazing how quickly people can get these reports out. So here's a May 2020 report talking about the future of digital work, saying that workers are anxious, as you would probably imagine, about their skills and careers. And in Australia, 1 in 3 are thinking about changing their jobs. 28% are learning new skills while they're in ISO, 17% of whom are hoping to progress their careers. 23% don't think they have the right skills. If you're interested, and these lists are always interesting, Here's a list of supposedly in-demand skills and the industries that they would be feeding into. But there's some interesting futurist workplace trend projections here, and this great word STEMpathy will get you hired. So this idea again about the hybrid jobs, that emotional intelligence is not programmable. So skill sets need to combine the digital and the technical with creativity and entrepreneurship. Well-being is a focus, and there is a criticality about being adaptable. The wellness point is well made, isn't it? I think in our higher education context, and it would serve us well to remember that the long-term mental impact of COVID-19 must not be ignored. And digital well-being of staff and students in these strange times is another COVID ramp up of an existing issue. Universities UK are all over this. I think you're better on this in the UK than we are. And you've got these marvellous resources that we look at quite enviously from our side of the world. Student Minds is such a boon for mental health and well-being research. You understand the impact also on staff. We can contribute, and we are working with colleagues in the UK now about curriculum enhancements to enhance student mental health and well-being. But just as with all Industry 4.0 disruption, the automation, globalization, unbundling, demographic change, COVID-19 is affecting higher education. And this is a bit of a move around the Australian landscape on this. So of course we've got job losses. There'll be a huge effect on sessional staff, casual staff, many of whom have already been terminated. Job losses are expected to hit research capacity quite significantly. You know, we can do big numbers too. So $19 billion lost due to student in revenue, due to lost international students. And in terms of who again is being impacted potentially significantly, the impact of women in STEM is a particular concern. And this is all against the background that it took higher education 2 years to recover from the impact of the SARS epidemic. You've got similar findings in the UK. Again, a tsunami effect with the reduction in funding. The suggestion that a large number of students may well not come to your institutions. They may well defer, 22% deferring, to be compared with 5 to 6% in previous years. And there's been requests for fee refunds. So we've got a lot of known unknowns. Thank you to Donald Rumsfeld. When we lift our head, I think we can see that the combined effect will be a lot on disruption. As regards demand, as you would expect, the forecasts are that a recession will drive student numbers to increase. But in Oz, as for other places, I'm sure we've got a cap on student numbers, and the government isn't giving us any indication that it's going to take the cap off domestic places. And we've seen the issue around deferrals in the UK environment. International students, what's going to happen there is a very uncertain outlook, and which countries will be attractive when. Is online a disincentive? Simon Margin says yes, but it may be a boon, though again, on the other hand, it's a much more global market. And which courses will attract students, and where will students go to upskill? For universities, the sustainability and the obvious financial and funding issues are front and centre. But I think we also have to consider the shape of an even more competitive global education sector, where just about everything is up for grabs. How, you know, will we be giving students more credit to attract them to come to our institutions? Will we be co-designing courses with further education or vocational education? Will there be teaching only institutions? And what's going to be the shape of the academic workforce? Will tech enhanced learning of courses lead to a lost generation of sessional staff? how will we manage all of this? And as I've suggested, you know, how do we go about trying to regain some trust which seems to be lost? And overplaying all of this, of course, is the digital student experience. I'd just like to get a little side word in about widening participation, if I might. So what is normal outreach work in these strange COVID non-physical circumstances? Here's a wonderful article by Anne-Marie Canning talking about a punk DIY ethic being needed to make sure that we don't lose the gains on widening participation that have been hard won in higher education. And here's our own National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education in Australia talking about what we're going to do about shifting widening participation outreach programs online, and quite critically maintaining institutional focus on widening participation in environments where you know, budgets are tight. So sorry to have to burst your bubble about this one, but in case you're thinking that a skills-led recovery is the answer for us here, in New Zealand and Australia and in the UK, a skills-led recovery, when government talks about that, they're not talking about higher education, they're talking about vocational education or further education. So while in Australia, for example, higher education has seriously been left languishing in terms of support, there's been frenetic government energy and dollars put into vocational education and training, so that's VET for us, put into that reform, because that's where they think the flexible and applied ways of learning are to be found. We only see universities really getting mentioned in this environment in the context of incorporating more practical vocational education courses into higher education programs. So the vision overall is sound. We do need to have this joined up ecosystem, but the way that government is potentially going about it at the moment is still an implementation siloing approach, and we need to get in on that action, I think. So when we talk also about what's happening in and it was almost like we're in disruption crisis 2.0, if we look at that, it's a scary thing, that sharp, spiky love child of Industry 4.0 and COVID-19. All of the pre-COVID-19 trends are accelerating. I think we were traveling reasonably well, plodding along potentially, but you know, we were getting there. And you can see my list of where I think some of the big gains were, particularly in learning and teaching, research and development, student partnerships, whole of institution, coordination for student success. I think we've made tremendous gains in embedding employability and career development learning, and collaborating with industry on that. And the hope should be, I think, that COVID-19 could be a bit of a catalyst for some iterative resolution of these plodding along initiatives that we've had, especially now that equity considerations and mediating disadvantage have been mainstreamed, because so many students have been disadvantaged. And I mean by that, you know, think about our policy and practices and how we accommodate students' complex and busy lives. In the past, we've been quite inflexible on that, but I think we've seen a whole new range of opportunities in that space now. We could also do with focusing on retaining the students we currently have. And we do need to have a realistic evaluation of what has worked for us so far. So we've been urged not to conflate remote delivery with good quality online teaching, which takes months to prepare. And so terminology has been developed from the US around what we're currently doing is panic-gogy, that really we're not doing much more than an initial phase of a pedagogical triage. And there's that great meme. And I think that's probably how a number of us are tracking at the moment. So now we get to the bit where we get to be calm. So take a breath to being calm. And this space that we're working in is of course not a greenfield site. There's lots of great resources and lots of great energy around all of the possibilities here, and I've just collected a few of them together for you. If I could be calm in an Australian way and just do a quick case study here, we need to remember that this is business as usual for us. We have always been contemporary, albeit probably more in updating disciplinary content and practice. But business as usual is in our course DNA around keeping ourselves current. For all those employers who have said that we don't upskill our students or produce skilled graduates, there is a regulatory imperative under our Australian qualifications framework, AQF, your framework for higher education qualifications, FHEQ, and then Scotland, the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, SCQF, for us to focus on knowledge, skills and application and look at the skills that we asked to focus on. And I've given you a bit of a roadmap there around the higher education standards framework against which we're regulated in Australia, and highlighted for you where the big boxes are. We're required to assure learning around this. We have to assure the acquisition of course learning outcomes for that skilled behaviour. And we're getting much better at doing that in quite authentic ways for graduate that represent graduate preparedness, as David Bowden Associates from 2010 would have us doing. And we've been collaborating in the co-design of these quality qualifications with both disciplines, communities and students. So if I look at a bit of a timeline around this, because this has been quite sustained and iterative work in Australia, we started, I think, in the late 90s with the graduate attributes agenda. So this isn't something that's just come to us recently or we've done in a panic in response to Industry 4.0. We were doing intentional course design to embed employability skills some years ago in Australia, employability skills being a subset of graduate attributes. In 2010, there was a national effort to develop learning outcome statements by way of broad disciplinary consensus, which harmonised multiple layers of regulation. These are quite similar, I think, to your subject benchmark statements. Then in 2012, we got our new national regulator, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, TEQSA, that regulates against the Higher Education Standards Framework that I just showed you, which has that imperative around quality, skills embracing course design. But there's also a regulatory imperative there, which I'm sure would come as a surprise to a number of our industry colleagues, for both courses and teachers to be current, contemporary and incorporate, for example, advances in practice, developments, and the knowledge and skills required for employment. So since 2012, it's not just been virtuous compliance with an employability graduate attributes agenda, it's been mandatory in Australian higher education course design to be fit for contemporary purpose and assure the coherent development of graduate learning outcomes as required. In 2016, we took it a step further. I was involved, and I was proud to have been so, in an exercise in which Universities Australia, UA, and the professional associations, PA, finally agreed some principles for professional accreditation, which had always been a bit of a contested territory for all of us. And TEQSA, our regulator's been talking with the professional associations about a complementary approach to professional accreditation and sector regulation. And then last year, I was involved with a number of good colleagues led by Professor Peter Noonan from Victoria University in a review of the Australian qualifications framework. So this is this has been a huge thing, and I think has the potential to see us making big inroads around what is possible in this environment. what we've attempted to do with the revised Australian qualifications framework is to completely revise the underpinning for modern qualification design with updated descriptors, as you can see them there, of knowledge, skills. And I point out that skills now, in a very modern way and a very vocationally education way, but not irrelevant, I would have thought, to medical practitioners and dentists, includes psychomotor skills and general capabilities, which we see as interweaving over the course of the design. The general capabilities include LLN, which is language learning and numeracy skills, the core skills for work, which critically include managing career and work life, includes digital literacy, and there's a framework for that, and ethical decision making. And the context within which the learning and the assessment conditions are to be found are very discipline specific, and they're all assured at the end of the day by good old assessment sitting out here on the end. This was a big dose of calm for me when I finally managed to grasp the complex reality of lifelong learning in Industry 4.0 and realise we don't have to do everything. In fact, it's not possible for us to do everything. We play our part in a continuum of lifelong learning, and what we should be required to do and be concentrating on is doing a much warmer handover to continuing professional development or continuing professional education, and interacting with that learning that occurs in and out of industry workplaces. The issue for us, I think, is our need to be very clear in our articulation of that reality, and not fold in the face of the continuing pressure for us to do more and more and more in our undergraduate courses in particular. So it would be nice, wouldn't it, to be able to articulate in a lifelong learning ecosystem type of way that, yes, everyone needs an entry-level post-secondary qualification as career foundational. Then learners continue to build on their knowledge and skills with upskilling and reskilling via short or not, accredited or not, online or not, courses and or not, full qualifications. And that in this ecosystem, micro-credentials, recognition of prior learning, much better recognition of credit recognition all round, and clearer pathways play a significant part. And this was part of our thesis in the Australian Qualifications Framework Review. Credit recognition is absolutely essential to making lifelong learning a practical reality for all. So if we're looking at what the equitable lifelong learning ecosystem might look like, I think what's needed probably is us to lead that consensus-based conversation about developing a strategy and understanding that it needs to be enabled by all of these various aspects. The parity of esteem, there's only so much without funding that can be done around this. And this is why, to give them their due in Australia, the emphasis is very much on vocational education at the moment, because it's very much been the poor cousin to higher education. We're getting a bit of a taste of the reverse now. Underpinned by increased tertiary participation, because we need to keep that widening participation focus on. The personalisation and quality of career advice is absolutely essential for that lifelong learning continuum. So imagine in this COVID environment, if everyone had easy access to career advice, they could be advised, for example, to do perhaps a short course now for a skills top-up, and then they could consider whether they wanted to do a longer, possibly informal qualification for post-pandemic workforce needs, and to ride out the pandemic. But the access to quality career advice is crucial. I've already mentioned the need for better recognition of prior learning, credit and pathways. And then there needs to be some way to package all this up. So you hear a lot of talk about lifelong learning accounts, or I've given you a link there to an interoperable learning record from the US. So it's like a digital backpack in which learners can register their learning and then do some self-assessment, and that meta career cognition piece around where they might see skills and gaps. We do need to co-create even more intensely with students in industry for this innovative World of Future Work courseware. Constant calls for us to connect tertiary education to the workplace, and that's, you know, in a range of ways. And we really do need to think about what integrated further education and vocational education plus higher education courses might look like. And again, I would say this, but there needs to be an enabling infrastructure by something such as a contemporary qualifications framework. Oh, look, we just did one last year. And I've looked at the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, and see you have this great RPL tool there, which I think we could do well to have a quite serious look at in the Australian context. And, you know, that's what we're talking about, I'm pretty sure. The issue about where learners will go to up and reskill. The Pearson report had another bit of a go at that, and they're talking about self-service learning. And as a sector, I think we do need to do much more work on trying to get a handle on what self-learning is out there and what people are doing. Our data currently are just not giving us a clear picture about what's going on. Your recent UK postgraduate report is a critical piece of data in that regard. But here, anyway, here's the Pearson take on it in the interim. And the green, you'll see there, is the short training program, so not universities, boot camps, professional associations, certificate programs. 43% of colleagues in the UK take that up. The grey in the middle is unis, essentially, unis or college programs, 23% in the UK. And the black is all the free courseware that's out there, YouTube, LinkedIn Learning, Khan Academy. Corporate education, they've discovered online learning now, so there's a problem. But, you know, well, there's a problem only if we make it a problem. So here's a recent article from Forbes on the 16th of May saying, any education and training that can be done online will be done online always from this point forward. It's faster, more effective and less expensive, and employees prefer it also. Everyone's online now. And when I have a look at what's happening in Australia, and why don't you Google best courses to do during lockdown? You'll be pleasantly surprised, I'd suggest, in that positive framing about how you can do your DIY upskilling, self-service learning from home. So here's my local tertiary and further education TAFE in Queensland, offering great free micro credentials, the digital literacy essentials, cyber security essentials, and free online skill sets. Coursera's got in on the act. You used to have to pay for a certificate, but you can earn a free certificate now until the 31st of July, and look at some of their great courses. Creative problem solving, creative thinking, that sounds very Industry 4.0. And I haven't even started on Khan Academy YouTube, in learning, which is the old lynda.com, and, you know, learn a language on Duolingo. In response to COVID, our minister announced on Easter Sunday that the government was, and I quote, slashing the prices of degrees and diplomas in short courses to enable people, rather than binging on Netflix, to be able to binge on studying. He called them micro credentials. I'm not sure that they're micro. I think the 6 months is possibly not micro, but anyway. And there is potentially a confusing overlap with some of these courses with vocational education certificates, where vocational education is really strong and learners are better off. But no matter, it's been pushed ahead with, and we have now added a new qualification type to the AQF. It's a 6-month undergraduate certificate that can be run anytime from May 2020, but it's only temporary, so we don't know how long it will last, but presumably till the end of the year. The funding for this was essentially a guarantee that we would keep all our domestic funding that we currently had, though there's some Commonwealth supported, which means government supported places, are also being extended to private providers. And as at today, the 26th of May, there were 241 courses there. These drastically slashed prices, go and get them courses. 110 undergraduate certificates ranging from a diploma, which is a sub-degree, to a bachelor qualification, 131 graduate certificates. I didn't want to leave you by just imagining this was all pie in the sky dreaming. So I just wanted to leave you with a concrete example of a possible future course. This is a new course that's been launched in the state of South Australia. They will be, I understand, available nationally. It's a diploma of applied technologies to, as it says there, upskill Australia's workforce demands with Industry 4.0. It's being delivered by a registered training organisation, an RTO, Skills Lab, and you see all the great language there around what it's going to do. It's using all the tech words. It's got great tech subjects, work in Industry 4.0, manage and analyse big data in cloud-based systems, but it's also got that STEMpathy and that hybrid aspect that we spoke about earlier, around developing communication and collaboration skills. But the really impressive and interesting bit for me in this is the partnering. So it's a registered training organisation, the RTO, partnering with the local state-based TAFE. I showed you the Queensland TAFE. Well, this is the South Australian TAFE. With one of the local universities and with a peak industry body, the Australian Industry Group. And it's being delivered via an excellent combination of online learning, virtual learning, in online real-time training rigs, which sound exciting, and workplace training. You know, if you were trying to conceptualize what the possibilities around cross-sectoral course and career design might look like, I think this is an excellent example. So thank you very much for bearing with me through this. I look forward very much to hearing your questions, and in light of the way this was framed, keep calm. I think we've got this. There's not to underestimate the amount of work we can do, but I'm hoping that this might have presented you with a positive way forward, which I think would be of benefit to everybody, us, our sector, nation building, our students, our economies, and our social well-being. Thank you.